people are alarmed, they're confused, and they become more so.
There is a lot more alarm around product safety and chemicals when you've got public opinion, expert commentary, fragments of science just sort of screenshotted or existing side by side. It's hard to really know what's true, what's evidence-based, and what should we trust.
When you see a lot of people on social media espousing various opinions on skincare, what do you think? Once somebody says something and it sounds like a truth, it must be very, very hard to undo.
What concerns me the most really is the confidence that people have when they try and translate evidence-based science. And what's concerning really is brands are listening to that.
Yeah.
So we're moving away from safe and effective products to cater for the noise that exists on social media.
Natural ingredients are safer. Does that actually have any meaning? Chemicals are dangerous. Why is this word so triggering?
Chemical-free being on a label
Yeah.
makes it look like there's some kind of notional superiority of one product over another. In fact, there isn't.
There are a swathe of apps out there that will be telling you that everything that you put on yourself is a toxin and a poison and is going to kill you. How do we deal with those?
The information they're providing is very one-sided. They're looking at hazard data. These apps just look at ingredients in isolation, so not the formulation put together. Presence is not the same as harm, and I think 99% of a lot of fear comes from just the presence of a chemical. And it's not to say it's a real risk that exists when we use our cosmetic products and sunscreens.
Hello everybody, welcome to the Skin Diary podcast. I'm Fiona, your host, along with the lovely Clare Kiely over here. I'm an investigative journalist, a science journalist, and a person who loves a good chat about evidence-based medicine. Clare, of course, as you will know, is a consultant dermatologist who has a special interest in cosmetic dermatology, skin ageing and skin cancer. She's on the executive board of the British Cosmetic Dermatology Group and is an honorary lecturer at the University of Manchester. She's also the co-founder and Chief Medical Advisor for the Skin Diary. But our guest today is Rani Ghosh. And Rani, wow, what a CV. You are a UK and European registered toxicologist with 15 years experience, and you specialise in chemical and product safety with a focus on skin health. You have also worked globally with global governments and industry bodies, leading safety strategies for cosmetics and medical devices from development stage right through to launch. You also serve on the executive committee of the British Toxicology Society as an independent assessor for the UK and European registers of toxicologists. And you're a registered specialist in chemicals in the UK government's Office for Product Safety and Standards. And your work centres on translating complex science into clear evidence-based understanding grounded in the belief that good science should reassure and not alarm. But, Rani, people are alarmed. They are alarmed, they're confused, and they've become more so over the last few years. Why?
Well, thank you for the introduction, and it's great to be here. Yes, definitely. There is a lot more alarm around product safety and chemicals.
Why? Why are they alarmed? What are they scared about?
I think now there are more voices in the room, and therefore, social media has helped to sort of democratize science and information. But what's happened along with that is really the pace of it. The interpretation piece hasn't kept up. And so when you've got public opinion, expert commentary, and then also fragments of science just sort of screenshotted or existing side by side, it's hard to really know what's true, what's evidence-based, and what should we trust. So it feels a lot more complicated and contentious.
I think people don't understand as well, Fiona, who the experts really are. And we are so lucky to have Rani here. Her bio is incredible, but she's clearly an expert at what she does. I don't think people really understand even what a toxicologist is. And just to give you an example, I chatted to some of my colleagues yesterday. I told them I was coming onto a podcast to talk to a toxicologist, and they all kind of looked at me quizzically like, yeah, I understand what that is, but why like a clinical toxicologist? So they thought I was talking to somebody who does poisons in a hospital. There are clinical toxicologists. And I looked at the British Toxicology Society website.
Yes.
So there's so many subspecialties in toxicology.
Definitely.
It really is a field full of expertise, and Rani is right there at the top.
When you see a lot of people on social media talking about things and espousing various opinions on skincare, what do you think? Are they qualified to say what they're saying? What kind of damage do they do? Because once somebody says something and it comes out and it sounds like a truth, it must be very, very hard to undo.
Expert and non-expert opinion has always existed side by side. I think that what concerns me the most really is just the confidence that people have when they try and translate evidence-based science. And again, like I said, it's a screenshot and fragments of science. And what's concerning really is brands are listening to that. And so we're in a space now where we're formulating away from safe and efficacious product, and we're trying to meet what the consumer wants. So, you have paraben free and you have preservative free because that's what the consumer's asking, and brands are meeting that.
Yep.
So we're moving away from safe and effective products to cater for the noise that exists on social media.
I guess these are some of the myths that come up quite a lot. So let's run through some of the common ones because they are literally smacking. I'm sure your social media feed is probably something like mine, and all I have is non-stop claims about skincare, diet, exercise, weight loss, you name it. We're being bombarded day after day with all of this kind of stuff. But one of the common ones when it comes to both medical things and skincare is natural ingredients are safer. Does that actually have any meaning?
Scientifically, natural doesn't really have a toxicological category, so it doesn't define safety. It's more of an emotional thing. I think when we know something's plant-based, we tend to think, okay, it's not synthetic, it's not lab manufactured. So it kind of hits that comfort spot from an emotional perspective. But natural doesn't mean safer.
If you can't pronounce it, it's probably toxic.
Chemistry is exact, and therefore the name of the chemical doesn't say anything about the safety profile of the chemical.
If our skin absorbs everything into our bloodstream.
We can take it back to basics. The skin is a barrier, not a sponge.
That was quick and easy. Chemicals are dangerous. Why is this word so triggering? And also, what common chemicals couldn't we live without?
It's triggering because I think the word chemicals becomes synonymous with synthetic and industrial, and it's lost its meaning really. Whereas the word chemical just means it's got certain atoms in it, it's got a certain structure to it, and that's all it's defining really. So it's become quite a scary term. But a chemical that we can't live without is water, which is dihydrogen monoxide. So that sounds scary in itself, but we know it's ubiquitous to life and we all need water.
Yeah, I wish we could rebrand the term chemical because chemistry is fascinating and everything is a chemical. Basically, chemistry is the study of the natural world, which is full of chemicals, including us humans. Everything being a chemical makes chemicals less scary. People still have that association with it being synthetic, and chemical free being on a label, I think makes it look like there's some kind of notional superiority of one product over another, where, in fact, there isn't, and as Rani has told us before, all of the testing is done before that product even gets to the shelf. So things like no tox or tox free or chemical free really don't have any significance when it comes to safety.
Yeah. So you're at the pointy end of this because you have to explain this to your patients. Does this take up quite a lot of your time?
It's usually one of those things when patients are kind of on the way out the door that they say, oh, what do you think about the chemicals in sunscreens, this kind of thing. So it is a problem in that, all of this advice and guidance that these quasi-experts are giving on social media is filtering down into people's opinions and is coming into my clinic. And I'm a skin cancer specialist, and every day I'm telling people, please wear your sunblock, obviously protect yourself from the sun. But yes, when it comes to sunscreens, which I know we're going to talk about a little later, that is definitely coming up because people are asking, what about the chemicals in my sunscreen?
You mentioned there low tox, and we also hear no tox and clean beauty, and these are chemical phrases. If you're dealing with industry bodies and you're seeing them moving in that direction, does it actually have any meaning, those terms as well? Is there a low tox?
I understand what people are trying to say when they say low tox. They essentially want products that are safer for their skin. And, you can understand where they're coming from. But scientifically, it doesn't really have a basis. There's no definition of what we mean by low tox. You typically see that claim language in marketing because it sells the product, essentially. And, the social media noise is feeding into that. So products want to make sure that they're catering to that, so people feel emotionally attached to that purchase as well.
Social media is such a big influence on all of these sorts of things. In many ways, do you think that it forced a sort of a form of mistrust within the industry? Because we see it within the health industry. I see it in the menopause area, which is where I spend a lot of stuff that nobody believes. We've got all of these big influencers out there saying X, Y, and Z that is often contrary to the evidence. But because they're popular and they say it before, as you said it with force, people believe it, and then they don't trust what the establishment says. How do you overcome that?
Yeah, it's very layered, that, and there's many reasons why mistrust has happened. We've had historical malpractices and failures in the medicinal world, for example, and so people don't forgive easily and they don't forget easily. But the key thing here really is science isn't static, it moves. And along with that, regulation moves and we make new decisions on cosmetic ingredients. But people think when you've made an ingredient ban or a restriction, actually we got it wrong in the first place.
Yeah.
But actually it's just shown that the system's active and it's working. And social media amplifies that. So if suddenly there's like a restriction on a cosmetic ingredient that we've used and we've loved for centuries, and suddenly there's a change, social media amplifies that, as in, there's suddenly a safety risk. And obviously the algorithm rewards inflammatory language, completely misses nuance. And then that's just what the consumer sees, quite hard hitting in their face. And that's what the message is after they walk away.
Yeah. The algorithm rewards kind of outrage.
It does.
People that are going against the norm, the outliers, stop using this ingredient because it causes, that kind of a narrative. And science is very nuanced and sometimes takes a while to explain. And the algorithms don't reward that. It's a tricky world to live in. Again, even just having Rani here talking about this today and putting her on a platform, because she represents the scientific consensus, and that's kind of what we need to look to. I agree with Rani as to there's always been a mistrust of kind of big pharma, and I think scandals in the past, like the OxyContin issue, puts a lot of mistrust in pharmaceutical companies, particularly because people think, these companies are all about profit before people, but actually the regulation is so layered that it's not these individual companies that are making the decisions. It is regulators. And because of those layers of safety, we can trust the products on our shelves.
Yeah, 100%. Beauty gets a bit of a bad rep, I think, because people use it as more a beautifying effect. It's not a medicine and it's not like a highly regulated product. So people assume there's no regulation just because it's not, it's not an oral medicine that you're consuming. And so there's often an assumption that it's not regulated because, you can go to your local pharmacy and buy it. There's no prescription around it, but actually it's very, very regulated. And it's all kind of behind the scenes work and it's all publicly available information. But at the same time, the interpretation piece really isn't there for the average person on social media or the average consumer to know that legally what's required to sell a cosmetic product. But if you go into your local pharmacy or, a high street shop and you're buying a cosmetic product, the safety has already been accounted for, hence it's on the shop shelf. It's not something you have to think about after you've hit the checkout and paid for the product.
You mentioned in there that it is assessed, but a lot of people think, well, okay, I manufacture X and my scientists have signed it off and they've just said it's okay because I'm paying them. How independent is that assessment process? When you're coming to make those regulatory decisions outside as these ingredients are fine, what's the process for ensuring that?
Yes, you can work for a company, but at the same time, every table that I sit at, I'm there to represent consumer safety. My responsibility from concept through to when the product's on the shelf is consumer safety. So I'm there to represent that, irrespective of who I work for. Science obviously has a scientific integrity and an ethos that you have to uphold and maintain. You can't ignore clinical evidence if it presents itself. So the decisions that we made are very much in line with current science, what regulation asks us to do. So it is accounted for.
And when you're making those decisions, how do you actually come to make them as a body? What evidence are you relying on to say that X, Y, or Z is safe?
So the European Union has a list of approved ingredients. So you can look at any limitations, restrictions, or if there's any bans in certain product uses. So you have to look at ingredient level. Then you look at a formulation level to see actually, is it formulated to be safe? Is the cumulative effect of certain ingredients going to create an irritation profile, perhaps a sensitization profile? You're constantly pressure testing against every single question that you have. And you either look to existing literature to fill the gap, but if you haven't closed the gap, you then generate more data. So every question that I have has to be answered before we can even think about commercializing the product. And that is a whole body of information that we can look at. Post-market surveillance data is really important as well.
Yeah. I
But
think
you've
something.
been through this, so
Yes,
how was it for
yeah.
you?
Really eye-opening to understand actually all the layers of regulation. I think that something that people don't really understand is scientific consensus. When you're listening to someone who has an opinion on social media, that is their opinion. But groups of scientists, it's not just a group of men sitting around a table in suits deciding what is allowed to be deemed safe. Scientific consensus is basically all of the totality of the data from all around the world from different independent researchers that has been done over years that points in the same direction.
Yes.
So if you are looking for an opinion, it is the scientific consensus that you need to look at. And what happens sometimes in social media, there's a big problem with this, is this thing called false balance or false equivalence. And I like to explain this to people by thinking about climate change scientists. So if you had a climate change conference where you had 999 climate change scientists who said, yes, we believe in climate change and global warming, and you had one who was a naysayer and thought, well, maybe this isn't real. And then you had someone from the media or, someone doing a podcast who decided to interview one of the scientists who were believers and one who was the naysayer. Then it looks like there's a 50-50. It looks like there's kind of contention between the scientists, where in reality there actually really isn't. If you're confused about these things, you're not sure where you should be looking for the data, it is the wealth of scientific consensus that really is where we get our data from.
I'm feeling really guilty now after years of journalism and stacking the naysayer in the room.
It's your fault, Fiona.
It's my fault,
no.
exactly. It's all my fault. But to confound the problem that we're in at the moment, there are a swathe of apps out there that will be telling you that everything that you put on yourself is a toxin and a poison and is going to kill you. How do we deal with those? Are they any good? Are they good ones? And should we be paying any attention to them?
It's quite difficult with health apps. I think they're there to meet a public need and a public demand, but actually the information they're providing is very one-sided. They're looking at hazard data. These health apps will typically look at credible sources, but they look at data that we've generated at an ingredient level. So we've pushed it to its biological limits, and therefore you're going to get results that look contentious. But product safety and toxicology, we work backwards from that data. So we have a wide margin of safety. So we're operating in a very conservative region so that there's no human health adverse effects when we're formulating. But these apps just look at ingredients in isolation. So not the formulation put together. And so the presence of phenoxyethanol could make it seem like you've got a really hazardous product. It's got a, red rating.
Yep.
Don't use it. And it's a traffic light system. And science, you cannot put it into colour. Colour blocks.
Well, you can't reduce all your years of training that we've heard of in your bio with, red, amber, green. It just doesn't work like that. And just, again, interestingly, one of my, yesterday was a regular day for me at work. I was doing Mohs micrographic surgery, taking a skin cancer off someone's face. And the joy of being able to do that kind of work is that you can chat to the patient and chat to the nurses around you. And we were talking about doing a podcast, and my lovely nurse, Anne, said, ask about these apps because my partner has gone mad using this app on every single product that we have, saying, oh, we can't use that, it's dangerous. We can't use that, it's dangerous. And she said, E45, Claire.
Yeah.
Is that it's not a problem because seemingly it comes up red? Absolutely not. And I think there is a perception that it's been pulled or something from the NHS, where actually what has happened, I had to look into this yesterday because she said, why is it being pulled? It's actually just that it's not being recommended for people with dry skin anymore. It's just being given out for prescribed for people with eczema and skin problems. So, it's a cost benefit thing really for the NHS. It's not because there's any concern about the ingredients. But this is how this kind of thing can filter down into people's everyday use. And if people are afraid of using their moisturiser, then we're just going to run into more problems with people with dry skin and dermatitis.
Wow. Yeah, that's of all of the inane products that are out there.
I know.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's quite addictive, the app life.
Yeah.
And it can filter into food as well.
Yes.
And then it's just, so no area is left untouched really with the app life.
Yes.
And then you're just left in this state of like, oh my goodness, I thought this product was safe. I've been consuming this. And then you're just left in this like real nebulous cloud of where do I turn to?
Anxiety.
Yeah.
You're anxious.
Completely.
Yes, it is. It's
Health
just
anxiety is a thing.
anxiety-inducing about all these small little minor things in the world when there's enough going on in the world to be anxious about rather than worrying about your moisturiser. But Rani introduced us to this amazing app. Now, I can't pronounce it, I don't think. Is it Cosmile or Cosmile, do we think?
I go with Cosmile. It could be Cosmile. But that's the only thing that we can really point to that has got scientific consensus like we were talking about. Cosmetics Europe designed this to meet this need, essentially. So where people are really concerned about certain ingredients, it's your app life as well. So we've designed it so it's like deals with modern day technology. We know that people like to zap things, and it tells you in a very calm, restrained way where you stand with ingredient science and should you be scared.
I tried it out last night in a few things and nothing came out too scary at all. So I think we should encourage people to use that. I'm going to be telling my lovely nurse Anne to tell her partner that this is what he needs to use. Ditch the other one and use Co-Smile.
I haven't looked at these popular ones now that are quite new, but I remember a while back, everything was coming out of the Environmental Working Group. And when you go to the Environmental Working Group's website, they're talking about things in massive concentrations.
Yeah.
We talked a minute ago about the formulation as well. If we're talking about poison coming in the dose, have these apps kind of missed the mark on the fact that you would actually have to be consuming or bathing yourself in vast amounts of something to have an adverse effect?
What they miss really is the exposure scenario and the foreseeable use. They take the ingredient isolation, they look at the data that's been pushed to its biological limit, so you can identify everything that could go wrong. And that's what they base their science on. It doesn't look at how you're going to be using it, which use scenario and how much you're going to be using it. And that's what determines safety, really. Everything can be a poison at a certain dose. Water can be. But it's a question of how much and how often. And that's the context it misses. So it's like me saying to you, don't drink water, it's going to kill you. But really it's, what's your body size? How much are you drinking? At what rate are you drinking it? What's your kidney function like? There's all these layers that you have to account for before it can be a poison. And that's what these health apps miss.
Yeah, they've even come for completely inert things like paraffin. You know, we use Vaseline so much in dermatology because it is a great barrier. It stops transepidermal water loss. We use it post-surgery for wound healing. But because it is a byproduct of the oil industry, it comes under a lot of fire, but it is highly purified and highly inert. And being a byproduct, it's just being produced anyway. So it's not contributing to the use of fossil fuels. It's just, you know, it's produced anyway. So I think there's nuance to all of these things. And if we started getting rid of all of these products that we use and are very useful and add to our quality of life, then these apps and all of this fear mongering is really doing us a disservice.
One of the things, or things that really always come under fire from people of ingredients that we really hate, are preservatives. Why are they in ingredients, and should we be worried about them?
The paraben problem, really, if we're all familiar with, and many decades ago, there was a paper that came out and people made a direct association with the presence of parabens and breast cancer. Preservatives got a bad name from there, really. Preservatives are there because they're there to protect water-based products. So it's going to prevent microbial spoilage. So it's good for you. If you don't have preservatives, you're going to have a pretty icky product pretty soon. It's going to have a short shelf life. And so they're there to protect the consumer ultimately, so you can use your product for a length of time under different conditions. And phenoxyethanol gets a bit of a bad rep as well, because that was the one that replaced parabens. And so people were very heightened to, we're putting in extra things to preserve a product. And the food industry gets hit with a lot with that as well, where you have these stabilizers and emulsifiers, and people just think this is all ultra processed, we don't need these things. But actually you do, to prolong its shelf life.
Yeah, and to make it safer. I mean, you're actually making a product less safe by not adding the preservatives. And it's unfortunate with parabens because they can't be used anymore, and they were very good preservatives. They didn't cause irritation, you know, they did a really good job, and the industry kind of had to move on from that because there was so much fear mongering around those. Phenoxyethanol, again, I think it's one of those ones that because it has a scary scientific chemical sounding name, I can't see any other reason why people get so concerned about it. Again, from a contact allergy perspective, it's not one of the higher risk ones. We need these preservatives in our products, and you know, it's good to have these conversations and to be honest and open about the risks and the benefits, but definitely for preservatives, the benefits vastly outweigh the risks.
It sounds chemically, like you said, and people try and replace it with like a fruit extract or something because it sounds nicer. But actually, what we do is we're moving into less efficacious products. What we need is broad spectrum. So that product that you're using should be pressure tested in a hot, humid environment, in the bottom of your bag, in colder conditions. So all these things introduce instability in a product. And with things like parabens and phenoxyethanol, it can really contain it and work within a wide range. Whereas these new generation of preservatives have a very short kind of operating margin. And so you probably will end up with less safe, efficacious products as a result.
I'm assuming that they're on these apps as well. Do you think there should be some sort of regulation for these kinds of apps and things like that? Do there need to be somebody looking in and going, hang on a second, you've gone too far?
I think there should be an oversight to it because it sometimes gives you the notion that you're making a health decision based on that. And how far does that go in someone's psyche? It definitely should be regulated because in the sense of what they communicate. there should be some kind of bar of what they can and can't say or do, because it really plays into everyday life of the average consumer and what's the long-term impact of that.
You touched on this before about, once a product hits the shelf, we can trust that it is safe. Talk us a bit more in detail through that kind of process. If Claire comes to you tomorrow going, look, I've got this brand new beautiful product, what are you actually going to be doing to make sure that she's on the right track to making sure that it is safe and efficacious?
So if it's a brand new product, I'll be looking at what else is out there that is a similar product. So you go outside and look at what the literature says of this product type. So you look at the formulation, and you don't just look at the chemicals as well. You look at physical, mechanical hazards as well. Like, how you're applying the product. Does it present itself a physical risk, a mechanical risk? We look at packaging. Is it adequately storing the product? So we would look to generate data really to make sure that it's hitting every question that we have, ensuring that when you sell the product, it's all regulated. We're looking at consensus. We're looking at regulation. It sometimes asks us to do specific things for specific product types. And the higher risk your product is, the more you have to do. So for medicines versus cosmetics, it's completely different, the bar. Like MHRA will ask us to do a lot more work and a lot more clinical work. Cosmetics, not as much. We don't do any animal testing in cosmetics. So any data we generate has to be animal friendly. So you can look at computational models. You look at structural analogues. So a lot of it is very mathematical, the work that we do, where we can't rely on animal testing anymore, and rightly so.
What are structural analogues?
So you look at existing structures and you see the data that you have on that. And then sometimes there's certain chains that are similar. So you can almost just make some translation from something that's well known to something that might be slightly new and novel without having to use animal models. Before, many, many moons ago, we would just execute on in vivo animal studies and get the raw data. Now you look at the body of data that you have, and then you think, what can I translate? And then what are the gaps? So it's down to chemistry, really.
What I was surprised about in developing a skincare are the levels of regulation that there are. But for each product, a toxicologist has to go through every single ingredient and give you a report, a cosmetic product safety report.
That's correct.
CPSR, yes.
Yes.
And that is pages and pages of details about every ingredient. And that has to be signed off on. And then there has to be a registered toxicologist who has signed off on your product and who takes responsibility. Am I right about that, Rani?
Yeah, there is a physical wet signature that takes place. It's not just a tick box. You have to be trained to know what you're looking at. And essentially, when a toxicologist signs off on that, you're putting your name to that. And you're responsible for that product for the life cycle of it. So even after it's gone out into the market, if there's in-market issues, that will come back to me. And I have to remediate and mitigate that. And then you go back to the basics. You think, is there anything that we could do to change the design? If you're seeing a repeated post-market event, you basically go back to basics and think, do we have to modify anything? Because we're seeing a spike in X, Y, Z. It happens very rarely if you formulated safely and effectively, but yet it doesn't stop after you've sold the product. It continues.
Yeah, so they're not signed off on lightly. There's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. I think this is a good point for me to talk about. It takes a village to make a cosmetic product. A lot of people look to dermatologists for information on everything to do with skin and everything to do with skincare. And we are experts in skin biology. We are experts in skin health and skin disease and bringing diseased, unhealthy skin back to health and, all the cellular processes that go on. But with skincare, it really does take a village. I mean, you have the chemists who are often organic chemists working in biotechnology who are actually making the molecules. That's a really fascinating part because they're working on, the new peptides or encapsulated ingredients, things like that. You then have cosmetic scientists who are the cosmetic formulators who work magic in creating these products because they know all about emulsions, they know about pH, they know how the ingredients interact with each other, and they create these beautiful formulations that we use. There are scientists in universities, some of whom we know very well, who are actually looking at these molecules and what they can do and how they interact with your cells. There's, of course, the dermatologists, and we know about how the formulations interact at a cellular level and can improve the skin. Then there's obviously people like Rani who are making sure your product is safe. And then there are actually scientists working on the regulatory boards. So there are scientists, like I'm sure people who Rani knows, the peers, who are working with the SCCS in the EU, who are sitting on these regulatory committees deciding on what levels should be allowed in products. So, there is a lot going on behind the scenes that I think people don't realise. And I think we should try harder to to really demystify the process for people and just be transparent about it and honest about everything that's happening. Once you're open and honest and transparent, even about the risks and the benefits, then people will be much more trusting of the industry as a whole.
No, I agree. I mean, what you've just said is just taking a whole mouthful for you to say, and that gets whittled down into just like one thought.
Yeah.
And no, it's not safe. So all of that just gets brushed aside. And maybe people online don't recognize that because they're just an influencer with a very strong opinion. And sometimes you can read around certain subjects and think you're a bit of an expert. But unless it's your day-to-day bread and butter, I don't think you can account for the nuance that goes on and the decisions that have to take place before a product reaches the market.
So it must drive you absolutely batty then when you see people, even on various, programs where they go on to raise investment and things like that, where they're saying, I've been manufacturing this in my kitchen and selling it online.
My immediate thought is just like the sanitary conditions, is it meeting quality requirements? There's so much that has to go on before you can even, batch things up and sell it.
Yeah.
So I always just say to people, if you shouldn't be concerned if you go into a shop and buy products, but if you go to a local farmer's market and Joe Bloggs has made this in his back garden in like a makeshift lab, that's when you need to be worried.
Yeah. Joe Farmer might have the beef tallow that he's also selling as well. So be
Scrap the
careful
SPF.
about that. Yeah. Scrap the SPF.
Oh, God almighty. You mentioned before that things evolve. And one of the things that has evolved and changed quite recently, which is probably very close to your heart because you are a person who deals with retinols and tretinoin and all those sorts of things over time, is a change in regulation on the limits of concentration of a product of vitamin A derivatives, retinol. Is it retinol? Only retinol
Can
or
I
any
just
of
say, I think this is a really good indication of how cautious the regulators actually are, because there has never been any indication or any research or any data that has shown that any of these cosmetic retinoids cause an increase in your blood levels of vitamin A. So I think that's really important to say.
Yes.
However, this is a kind of a theoretical risk, and, Rani will be able to explain it better than me, but this should not cause concern amongst people. It should just highlight the fact that, wow, these guys are really taking all of these things very seriously, and even if there is a theoretical risk, they're going to account for that.
Yes, 100%.
I think it'll probably just cause more disappointment with most people. It's like, I want my retinol.
It's not going away. Retinol's here to stay.
Yeah.
But yes, it did cause a bit of a buzz last year when restrictions were placed, and we didn't have restrictions on retinol before. And it's just the reason why this happened, and we have this something called the precautionary principle. So it's a very well-known thing in Europe. We're very precautious. So even if something has uncertainty around it, what we will typically do is we will take action. And that doesn't mean we've got it wrong before or suddenly harm's presenting it when you exceed a threshold. It just means we recognize there's a widespread use of it. With vitamin A, people are having it in their diet, the supplements. And so we took the cautious angle of just putting restrictions on for use on your body and your face. And you can still formulate with an effective region with those restrictions. It's just, let's just be a bit more cognizant of the fact that people are consuming a lot more vitamin A in various different modes. So yeah, like you were saying, Claire, it's a sign that we're being active and erring on the side of caution. But I think it often gets translated as, what were we exposed to all this time up until October 2025? Why has this suddenly taken place? And so what you see is a lot of brands reformulating, but actually they don't put their scientists in the forefront of their marketing to say, this is why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And as opposed to people making up their own minds as to why is these restrictions come into play. There's an iconic foundation that's been around for a very, very long time. And they recently had to reformulate because one of the ingredients that they have has got an environmental concern. And so social media's gone a bit crazy about like, why has that happened? Was it unsafe before? But it's because we know there's an environmental concern. There's an effective replacement, so let's just replace it.
So it's all about precaution and hypothetical risk, which I think leads nicely into the sunscreen filters, because people are very, very concerned about the effect of sunscreen filters, yet no regulatory body has ever said that there is any concern about any risk, and have always advised us to keep using our sunscreens. I talked about rebranding chemistry earlier on. I'd love, on behalf of the photobiologists who I know this drives them mad, to be able to rebrand sunscreen filters, because we all call them mineral and chemical. But as we know from what we talked about earlier on, everything is a chemical. So titanium dioxide and zinc oxide are also chemicals. So they're all chemical sunscreens.
Yeah.
It's much more exact to call them organic and inorganic, just from a kind of a scientific perspective. And they're actually much more similar than we even previously thought, all these sunscreen filters, because we used to say, and I am even guilty of this, we used to always tell people that the mineral filters, which are the inorganic ones, reflected UV. And that kind of makes sense because it gives that white cast and you can kind of see it reflecting. But actually, we now know from spectroscopy data that both of them actually absorb UV and convert it to heat. But there's always going to be a comparison between the two. And from us, from a dermatologist point of view, it's really down to which one you like and which one you're going to use. Some people get irritation from the organic filters, and some people just like the mineral filters better because they don't get as much irritation. Some people don't like the inorganic ones because they can cause a white cast. So, from my perspective, I always say, the one that you're going to put on your face and use every day is the one to use.
Because I still thought that the mineral ones were reflective with a barrier.
Yeah. So did we all, but there's data now to show that they also absorb light.
The other thing, there are many myths, so let's have a look at some of the myths around
let's do it, because this is the kind of thing that does come up in my clinic. I understand people's concerns, especially when you're telling people to use something every day. I think these are the myths that we really need to try and bust, because some of them are actually dangerous. So let's go, Fiona.
All right, number one. They cause cancer.
Sunscreens do not cause cancer. There is absolutely no evidence for that. UV radiation does cause skin cancer. There are years of scientific consensus and lots of data to show that. As a dermatologist who specialises in skin cancer, and I've treated thousands of skin cancers, I look at them every week under the microscope. The vast majority of those are caused by UV exposure and skin aging. They are the two reasons for getting skin cancers. And we definitely know that wearing your sunscreen reduces your risk of skin cancer. There's been some very good studies. The NAMBOR study, they followed people up for 10-15 years looking at sunscreen use in that one, and they showed that people who used sunscreen regularly had a reduction in melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers. So sunscreens are safe and effective.
Have you ever seen anybody die from using a sunscreen?
No, I shouldn't laugh about that, but no. And I think if you use your sunscreen every day, your future self is going to thank you for it. I've never seen anyone come into me and say, I really regret doing that.
Yes. It's like going to the gym. You never regret a workout.
No.
You will not regret wearing sunscreen.
No.
Mineral and chemical ones you mentioned before. Mineral ones are safer than chemical ones.
Not true. Again, there's been lots of study and lots of toxicological data and consensus showing that they're both completely safe in the levels that we use them in the sunscreens that are on the market today. I think a lot of this comes from, and again, Rani will be able to talk to this much better than me, comes from the FDA studies. In the US, sunscreens are a drug. So these are the most scrutinised, I would say, of all cosmetic ingredients.
Yeah.
Partially because we use them so much, but also because in the US they're a drug. And in studying drugs, they again look at exposure limits and safety limits. And one of the studies that they did, maybe I'll get Rani to talk about this one because I'm sure it's, where they plastered sunscreens on people, showed a tiny little rise in systemic absorption of some of the organic filters. Nothing that caused any concern, but just led them to think that maybe we should just look into this a little bit more. But, nobody decided to take them off the market. Nobody decided to say that they were of any harm, just because that's how they look at drugs when they're looking at drugs in the US.
Yes. No, I concur. There is no safety concern. A couple of years ago, it was probably about 2019, just before COVID, they did some studies because there was a gap in some data. And like you said, they're a drug, so the bar of what we need in terms of data is slightly higher. So they generated some data, and like you said, it's exaggerated use, and they did detect some of the chemical filters in blood chemistry. Now, detection doesn't equal harm, and the FDA were very clear on that. This is not cause for concern or for alarm. This is research and something to keep our eye on. But if you detect a chemical in your blood, it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be a known carcinogen. It's not going to have any systemic effects. Not understanding that probably underpins about 99.9% of all the fear that exists. Just because it's there, people fear harm. But actually, that's where the nuance of science comes in.
Yeah, it goes back to the paraben and the breast cancer, really, doesn't it? Just because it was found doesn't mean there was any causation.
Yes, and it was a very poorly designed study.
It
But
was
that's a side note.
Exactly. Moving on to other ones, there are lots of plants and coconut oils and things like that out there that are natural defences against the sun. So therefore, you're better off making your own sunscreens at home because they'll be much better for you.
If you want to slather yourself in pseudocreme and look like a ghost, I mean, that's up to you. But any of the kind of plant ingredients, and we do study the plant ingredients, there's things like Polypodium leucotomas, which we know as a supplement helps reduce against photo damage in the skin. But as regards topical plant ingredients, any of the data on those I think has shown that maybe they might increase your sun protection factor by like a factor of 2 or something. You know, things like raspberry extract, which is really, really nice. It's a nice antioxidant to have in your skincare, but it's not going to give you the same level of protection as these really well-studied UV filters that have gone through multiple layers of testing. And, you know, now we have all of these new ways, these in vitro ways of actually testing SPF levels, which we're all delighted to see because the old ways of testing SPF weren't very robust. There is nothing that compares to the organic and the inorganic filters that are in your sunscreens.
The other big one, I guess, when it comes to sunscreen is their endocrine disruptors. What do we know about that? Are they dangerous to us? And at what level would they be? How many litres of sunscreen would we have to drink for it to be a problem, if at all?
Endocrine disruption is quite a contentious one, and it's found its way into cosmetic science, but really it started off in environmental situations where we're looking at contamination of water. So people were looking at fish, amphibians, and they noticed there was a bit of a repro issue with wildlife. And naturally, when you identify a hazard, it creeps its way into other regulatory frameworks. And it's not to say it's a real risk that exists when we use our cosmetic products and sunscreens. So in lab simulations, I think they saw some activity. So it was competitively binding with some of the hormone receptors. Now, activity is not the same as disruption. And I think that's the most critical thing that people need to be aware of.
Yeah.
In a lab setting is not the same as a consumer use setting in real world scenarios.
Endocrine disruption sounds scary, but for endocrine disruption to happen, you need to have a biological effect. You know, the endocrine system has to be disrupted. But what some of these molecules are doing is just causing endocrine activity in a lab, in a petri dish. And that hasn't translated to any harm to humans. Endocrine disruption is one of those things. I think it's a really tricky thing to understand.
It's a trigger point as well.
Yeah, and it's a trigger point. It goes into your world, Fiona, where, you know, with, you know, reproduction and fertility and menopause and early menopause, and, you know, people are worried about their endocrine systems and how that's affecting, you know, them biologically. So yes, it's a trigger for people, and it's one that instills fear. And I think it is very nuanced, specifically the science to this. It's one of these things that is really difficult to explain and to get across. I mean, if I was to ask you what an endocrine disruptor was, do you think, you know, could you explain it?
Not easily.
No, it's not an easy one. It's not an easy one to sort of like neatly tie up. So it means one thing. Like your endocrine system is responsible for so many things. It's not just this one thing. But I think the ultimate level of really is cosmetics aren't designed to be systemically available like your sunscreens. And so, you know, the skin is not a sponge, it's a barrier. It comes back to those basic principles of skin biology, really. Even if there are some small amounts or quantities systemically available, you're not going to get organ damage, organ failure, or cancer. So you're more at risk at not wearing sunscreen.
The other big one, of course, is that if I wear my sunscreen, it's going to mean that I can't produce any vitamin D. It's going to block that. Is that true or not? Do you need a vitamin D supplement if you're wearing a sunscreen?
I think the current consensus is your GP would typically advise us Brits living here, take your vitamin D supplements just because, you know, the weather isn't on our side.
That's an understatement.
But in terms of blocking vitamin D synthesis, I don't think anyone is slathering themselves top to toe with sunscreens.
No. And again, this is something that comes up in the clinics, and there has been research on this, and it has shown that people who wear sunscreen and go out in the sun do not have lower levels of vitamin D, because oftentimes if you're putting on sunscreen, it's probably because you're going out in the sun. And that means that you're probably getting some UVB, and you only need small levels of UVB on exposed areas of your arms and your face for about 15-20 minutes to increase your vitamin D levels to where they should be. And vitamin D is a vitamin that's stored in your fat, so your levels kind of will build up. So vitamin D in general, yes, if you're living in kind of northern climates, especially in the winter time, our levels tend to be low. So it's an easy thing to take a vitamin D supplement. You know, it really isn't a reason for you not to wear your sunscreen.
People with darker skin types don't need sunscreen.
I even have colleagues who would say, they kind of believe this. It is definitely true that the vast majority of people in my clinics with skin cancer have lighter skin tones. However, pigmentary changes and sometimes skin cancers can definitely also happen in people with darker skin tones who have exposed themselves to UV. It's just that it happens a lot later. Aging in darker skin tones, we know, starts happening, at least a decade after it does in lighter skin tones, and that is all photo damage. But the photo damage expresses itself differently in darker skin types. So it expresses itself as pigmentary change, still wrinkles and things like that. And the pigmentary change can lead to things like melasma, which is quite tricky to treat. So yes, sunscreen is still definitely recommended.
And the one that I'd like to fool myself with is if I've got my sunscreen on, I can lie out in the sun for as long as I like.
That is one of the things that has been a huge problem for us as dermatologists, because people have often thought that they're just invincible with one application. And people will come in and say, I don't know why I have a tan, doctor. I put my sunscreen on. Well, you just did not put on enough, or you were exposing yourself to UV for too long. I mean, you can't just rely on sunscreen. You have to do all of the other methods of protecting yourself from UV. So that is wearing a hat, wearing your big glasses, sitting in the shade, not going out at those times of day when the UV index is very high. We all have apps on our phones now so we can check the UV index. We are not telling you to stay inside. Being outdoors is healthy. We know that visible light is healthy. We know that being outside in the light is good for us. It's just about being sensible and, taking measures to protect your skin.
One of the other big areas when it comes to toxicology is the difference between if I have an allergic reaction or if I'm sensitive to something, does that mean that an ingredient in the product that I'm using is a toxin?
Your immune system and your allergy system is completely different to toxicity. So the two are not the same. So we do know that up to 2 to 3% of the population do have a fragrance sensitivity. And really that's just clinical management. There shouldn't be a nationwide ban on fragrance ingredients because 3% of the population are sensitized. It's just brands need to do better in terms of labeling, communications, and obviously dermatologists will tell their patients steer clear of fragrances, particularly these ones, and look for fragrance-free products. So it's just clinical management. We don't have to demonize fragrances. They're not toxic. It's just individuals have susceptibilities to it.
Yeah. Dermatologists definitely have a bias against fragrance, and that is because there is a whole subspecialty of dermatology that deals with contact dermatitis. So it's called contact dermatology, there's a society, and they have an allergen of the year even.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They do. What is this year's allergen of the year?
I think it's benzyl alcohol. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's always, they kind of pick one that people might not have known of, and it's a really interesting subspecialty, but the vast majority of allergic reactions that are tested for are from nickel, which is, a lot of people are allergic to nickel and fragrance.
Batteries.
But that does not mean that fragrance is a toxin or fragrance is bad. It just means that some people tend to have an allergy to it. And a lot of people with eczematous skin or dry skin tend to be in that category. So that's why we tell people if they have sensitive skin to avoid fragrances. But that's only what, as Rani said, it's about 5% of the population. So, 95% of people don't have issues with fragrance and can carry on using fragrance. I mean, I love fragrances. I love my fragrance candle. I love my perfumes and my fragrance products. And I can't imagine a world where we banned fragrance, because I think for all of us there's such an emotional attachment to a lot of things. I mean, smelling kind of the Nivea sunscreens every year just reminds me of summertime on the beach in the the late 80s. Yeah, I think fragrance is an emotive thing for a lot of us, and it's a nice thing to have in our products because it helps us with that kind of ritualistic experience of putting on our products. But yes, there are some people who should avoid it. Fragrances and foams are generally the things that we in dermatology, if you have a sensitivity, we tell people to avoid those.
Which has just reminded me actually of fragrances. Phthalates. This was one of the another set of nasty ingredients that people were very unhappy about, and saying that it was often made its way into products through fragrance and things like that. Should people be worried about phthalates?
Phthalates are there really as like a plasticizer, so it helps bring out the fragrance to its maximum ability. So it's almost just, it's not intentionally added into the formula. It's part of the fragrance compound that you have. There doesn't need to be a cause of concern of phthalates because the bad ones are banned and restricted. And the fragrance industry does use phthalates, but it uses the regulated 1 ones that are allowed at the right concentrations. So if you're using a fragrance product, you don't have to be concerned about phthalates.
And the fragrance industry itself is very highly regulated.
Yes.
It's IFRA, I think, the
IFRA,
regulators.
yes, and RIFM. So they're two huge bodies, independent bodies, so they're not affiliated with any corporations, and they do a lot of the science behind it and all the toxicological studies and all the blends, because we know fragrance isn't one component, it's a whole multitude of components. We can't label that on the back of pack, and I think people oftentimes think, oh, it's a secret what people are putting on there, because
Parfum.
Parfum. And we label the 26 most common allergens, and we're increasing that now up to 90 something. And it's just about how do we show that to the consumer, because you've got a small bottle to work from. And so we're thinking about QR codes and things like that. But yeah, it can have up to about 150 different components within a fragrance compound.
The most common allergens now, even if they're part of a fragrance blend, have to be labelled on the product.
That's correct.
And again, that's that CoSmile app. You can actually use that to save the allergens that you might be allergic to. So then next time you check a badge, check an Inky label, it'll check and see if that allergen is in there for you. So that's a handy thing to be aware of. Actually, our age defense product, was a whole other learning curve for me developing products. But our age defense, the base product itself had a scent, because, at the end of the day, scents, again, are chemicals, like we know everything is. They're just, molecules. And even if you don't put a fragrance in your product, it still can have a scent. So sometimes companies will
and sometimes
add,
they can be nasty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are products that don't smell that great. We added a small scent just to kind of tweak the scent to that completely changed it. It's one called Rich Earth, made by, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, but Givaudan, yes. Who you used to work with. They're the big fragrance house.
Yeah,
aren't they?
we have, every corporation will have a relationship with the biggest fragrance houses. Yes, definitely. So Givaudan, the well-known ones, and they make quite a lot of the trendy celeb brands and fragrances as well. So yeah, they have a whole team of scientists, and they generate a lot of data. So when we take their fragrance blends, or if we've created something, a lot of the work has been done up front. And so I look at that data and I interpret it to make sure that it fits within how we're using it.
Yes.
And they will give you recommended use amounts, different product types, how much you should use. They've done a lot of that pre-work. And so we have to make sure we incorporate it into our cosmetic product safety report.
With Rich Earth, it's part of their mood sense range, and they have data to show that it enhances your well-being.
Oh, that's nice. That's very sweet. Who doesn't want their well-being enhanced? You mentioned there's sensitivity and allergen and dry skin. So just let me define these out there. Is a sensitivity an allergy? And could you reduce your sensitivity if you improved your skin barrier?
Okay, so an allergy is an immune response. And, once you have developed that allergy, you're going to have that problem with that product. You can have sensitivity to something because your barrier has been compromised. So say if your skin is quite dry because it's winter and you've been in lots of rooms with the central heating on and you're just dried out, something that wouldn't usually irritate you, you might put it on and you might think, oh, I'm reacting to this. But it's not that you're allergic to it, it's just that your skin has been sensitized. If you have sensitized skin and you are continuously exposed to an allergen, sometimes you can become allergic to that allergen from, repeated exposure. So one of the reasons why we think that, fragrance is one of our top contact allergens is because there's so much fragrance out there in the world and everything, we're very exposed to it. So if you are a person who may be sensitized to that, then, you could develop a fragrance allergy.
God, it's complicated, isn't it? Which leads me then to ask, after all of this and being at the pointy end of all of that, what was it that drew you to toxicology? And are you planning on staying?
Toxicology was a totally accidental career pathway for me. So it's not something that I mapped out for myself. It's a very small discipline in the UK. In the US, there's a lot of undergraduate programs and postgraduate programs. So that's probably another reason why people are not familiar with the scientific discipline in the UK and EU. It's not a big deal. You see a lot of corporations have their safety teams in the US. L'Oreal does, Estee Lauder does, etc. So it's an accidental career pathway, but one that I enjoyed. I was someone that's always suffered from chronic inflammatory skin conditions. So I've been a consumer from childhood eczema to cystic acne. I've been a patient of isotretinoin. So I understand the challenges that people have. So toxicology helped me sort of blend science into something that was quite personal. So I definitely do enjoy my work, and I understand the need for products when people are desperate for solutions and what that means to people on an emotional level.
You spoke about why you became a toxicologist, kind of the journey of, you know, having a skin problem. It's so funny. So many people go into
I'd so love
different
to do this.
fields.
No, I had the ugliest kind of acne.
Yeah.
And it was very emerging.
Well, your
Roaccutane
skin
was
is
emerging.
amazing now.
Yeah.
So obviously, you know,
fixed
you
up a
are
little
one of the
bit.
people who, the vast majority of people who do really, really well with isotretinoin. And I mean, that's a whole other podcast we could do on the benefits of
Yes.
isotretinoin.
It was life-changing for me, and I'm sure a lot of other patients.
Yeah.
But yeah, so skin and me really was just like, it was like an aligned profession. So toxicology was something that was completely accidental. I think if you work in science or if you study academic science, pharmaceuticals really where you think you're going to be at the forefront of a therapeutic. And actually consumer healthcare and beauty products and over-the-counter products are not something that's generally covered within an academic program.
How do you become a toxicologist? I mean, we actually might have people who are listening today that think, wow, I'm really interested in this and I'd love that to be my career.
The flagship course really is University of Surrey. They offer a really good undergraduate and postgraduate degree. So I think, and Birmingham University offers one too. So there's not that many. And so the work that I'm doing with the British Toxicology Society is really to just champion this field so people understand what it is, so we get more of an uptake. But you can carry on to PhD studies and do it. I did it the harder way. So I was a neuroscience grad. I was completely different. I was a brain scientist and I was looking to find therapeutics for childhood cancer. And so the career of regulatory sciences was completely accidental. I found myself working in one of the biggest cosmetic houses and I really enjoyed it. And so I did it the harder route. I had to do a lot of self-disciplined learning, a lot of mentorships, a lot of exams. And ultimately I submitted for my registration to the UK and the European Register. And I was accepted after about 5 years. And that's ultimately your seal of approval, really, to say that, okay, you know, your professional standing in the field of toxicology.
Yeah.
So I took a different route into it.
So toxicologists are registered in the same way as doctors are on the GMC.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah, definitely. The unfortunate thing is it's not a protected title, the word of toxicology. So you may get people doing a job of some kind and calling themselves a toxicologist. And that's
interesting.
where it starts to unravel a little bit. But definitely, if you're looking for people to trust, look for their registration status. In the US, you can be board certified. It's a similar sort of thing. And I now invest my time into helping people with their registration. So I sit on the panel and I help professional toxicologists get their registration and get that professional standing. So there's multiple routes in. There's no one track in.
So you are staying then?
Yes, I am. Toxicologist for life.
Yeah, that's amazing, Rani. See, there's even more reason for Rani to stay
There
now.
is, definitely. I think I accidentally, again, found myself in a space of just stepping outside the corporate world and realising the noise that was going on. We work quite in an insular way, and there are not many toxicologists that specialise in skin health and cosmetic science. I think I'm probably the only one in the British Toxicology Society that represents this industry. Everyone else is agrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, and all the other big chunky, meaty industries. Whereas I'm probably the only advocate to just say, let's think about cosmetic science when we're thinking about the landscape of toxicology, and let's not forget about it because it's very important. And the consumer noise, you can't ignore it. And we have an obligation as a scientific community to help consumers in any way, which way we can. As much as all the other industries.
Yeah, you're really right. We do have an obligation. And I think science communication now is becoming something that is being taught even more in medical circles as well. I mean, I was at a meeting just this week in the kind of centre of British dermatology in Willan House in central London. And it was a bringing together of a lot of the kind of heavy hitter scientists in the world of dermatology. And one of the big problems that was highlighted as a focus was communicating what we understand and what we know in our day-to-day lives as scientists to the broader community, because right now we're not winning that battle. The influencers and the kind of naysayers and fearmongers are actually winning that battle. So we need as a scientific community to really come up with a solution to that. And I think we've probably stayed in the shadows a bit too long, just kind of hoping that it would go away, but it's not going away.
I think a lot of people aren't even aware of it. I think if you raise your head above the parapet, then you see and hear it. I was completely immune to it because I'm not someone that lives in social media land a lot. And I think if you play in that space, you suddenly realize how big the problem is. And I think as scientists, communication isn't always our strength either. We know what we're talking about sometimes and within our community, but actually we do ourselves a disservice if we can't translate that into layman speak so others can understand it, especially in this space.
Yeah, Bebe Du-Harper, who's one of the dermatologists on our team, she is finishing up her PhD at the moment. But she was telling us that that's what they actually get them to do now when they are presenting research, is to try and dumb it down. I mean, when I was doing my training, the more complicated sounding terminology that you could use when you were giving a presentation made you sound like you really knew your topic, and kind of you were hoping that nobody would ask you any questions about it because it just sounded so complicated. But they're actually completely going away from that now. They're like, well, if you really understand this topic, you're going to be able to explain it to me in layman's terms.
Absolutely, 100%. That's exactly what I was going to say. If you really know your stuff, you can make it relatable, and that is really the challenge. And it's exactly the same as we face at the moment with the menopause stuff, because we've got people saying absolutely outrageous off-piece things, combining your neuroscience in that one at the moment. Basically, at the moment, if you're not on HRT, your brain will eat itself or you will die from brain death. They are two things that two doctors
That's
have
a new one
actually
on me.
said.
Gosh.
Yes, that's a good one. I know a lot of people who are not on HRT over the age of 60 and they're still supporting their own breathing. Extraordinary sort of stuff. But you just kind of look at it, you think, you know, also just in terms of if you're not taking creatine, if you're not taking X or Y, Z peptide, your brain will not function. There is so much there that's not just cosmetic, is in every single social media feed non-stop. And you have to be able to explain it or you're just left behind.
Bombarded with information. And, you know, now that we have AI, we have all of this information at our fingertips. But it's understanding that's the problem. You know, the information has increased, the knowledge hasn't increased.
Yeah.
And the AI will pick up the loudest voices and put that up as a fact. And often the loudest voices are the least accurate, unfortunately.
Yeah, you always need to fact check your AI.
I've played with AI and if you just take it on face value, it's hugely, hugely incorrect.
Yeah.
And if you don't understand the discipline, you don't know that and you run with it.
Yeah. You're an amazing spokesperson for toxicologists.
Thank you.
And Rani also has a Substack.
I do, yes.
And your Instagram, which I think we should guide people towards.
Thank you.
Because all of the information, I mean, I've been kind of deep diving on some of it over the last week. It's really fascinating. You have an amazing way at explaining what is quite complex science in terms that we can all understand. What's the name of the Substack?
It's just Rani Ghosh.
Oh, okay.
And it's there's a link in my bio so if anyone wants to follow it, but it's just a space for me really just to sort of dilute the noise a little bit, a bit measured, and just talk about the real world safety, you know, from my world as someone that does this day to day.
Yeah, excellent.
And if there was one takeaway message you wanted people to walk away with from this?
Presence is not the same as harm. And I think 99% of a lot of fear comes from just the presence of a chemical. So if you're using regulated products that you've bought from reputable outlets, you're absolutely fine with product safety. The question you have to ask yourself is it doing what you wanted to do with the price that you paid for it?
And you, Claire?
Mine is chuck the scary apps and use CoSmile. I've given CoSmile a lot of exposure today, so that's good. My other one would be listen to the scientific consensus. Don't listen to the opinion of one person, because that one person might be a complete outlier in the scientific community. So look at the scientific consensus. And my last one, of course, is going to be about sunscreen. Everyone should try and find a moisturiser that has broad spectrum sunscreen in it, SPF of at least 30, one that they enjoy using, and just try to put it on every day. Your future self will thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you both for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Thanks, Rani.